Hi, this is Will. This is webinar 6. I'm really excited to share this information with you because it was really life-changing for me. And it's all about decision making. And the way I want you to think about decisions is there's really two dimensions. One is making the right decision, that's the best decision you can. And the second is how do you make a decision right? So I want to address both those dimensions in the next few minutes. As we start off with questions about what do you really need to make decisions for? So, anytime in your life when you're uncomfortable with the status quo, you ask yourself this first question here on the slide: what's happening and what should be happening? And if there's a big gap, then it's probably time for a decision. Now, as we try to make decisions, we're really geared to avoid threats, danger, mistakes, and we try to gather data typically. And in most decisions, there's two kinds of data. There is knowable data and unknowable data. There still might be data, we just don't have access to it, and we can't get access to it. There's just stuff we don't know, how people think, what's in their mind, what their agenda is, or unknown factors about taking any step that are just plain unknowable. And like most human beings, we really crave certainty. So we often get stuck not being able to make decisions or move forward because we're waiting for certainty, yet there's a lot of unknown data in the decision we're trying to make. And so not making a decision becomes a decision and we have to live with those consequences. So the way really good decision makers work is on probabilities. What is the probable outcome of either making decision A or decision B? As I'm talking, I really want you to think about decisions in your life that are important to you or your work, and maybe decisions that you've been putting off because of unknown factors. So we're just going to go through how you might approach that. Um, First of all, there's the motivation. Now, all of us, because we're human beings, we have a genetic design that makes us threat sensitive. Now, some people are very threat sensitive and other people are less so. And I'll talk about more about that in a minute. But what that does is it keeps us really glued to the status quo most of the time. And so we continuously adapt. And if we adapt to things we shouldn't adapt to, that is, tolerate circumstances that should be intolerable, that's called maladaptation. So we do this sometimes with our own health and habits. We do this with relationships that become toxic or just continually difficult or full of conflict. We just gradually begin to accept the unacceptable. And so one day, hopefully, we wake up and we say, if I knew that this was going to be this way when I started, would I have chosen this path? And if the answer is no, then you're ready to make a decision. So the big question that researchers at the University of Michigan have developed with people who really want to make big decisions is if nothing changes, is that okay? Because if it's okay if nothing changes, nothing will change. You probably won't make that decision. So let's suppose there's something in your work or your life that you'd really like to change. And it's not okay that it doesn't change. How do you best go about it? Well, I began working about 20 years ago with a company named Clear Direction, and it was led by a professor named Dr. Robert Kinsel Smith. And he had done lots of research with another researcher by the name of Dr. Robert Hartman about how our brain works. And over the course of time, they've done over 250,000 surveys. And as they were looking at how your brain works, what they really discovered is that our brains really make decisions or evaluate decisions in three dimensions. The first dimension is analytical. This is the data-driven part of our brain. And it's also the part of our brain that thinks in either or dichotomies. So it's either right or it's wrong. It's either black or it's right. Um, it's either black or it's white. Or but it's on off. So it's that kind of decision making. And what it's looking for all the time is hard provable data. So I want to make a decision based on hard provable data. But as I mentioned, in most important decisions we make, there isn't hard provable data that is sufficient to know that we're making a fail-safe decision. So the second element that we bring to decision making is practical thinking. And practical thinking is our judgment as to whether we will get the results that we want from making this decision. The best way to know that is, have we made decisions like this before, and what were the results? Or do we know and trust other people who've made decisions like this, and what were their results? Also, if we have enough self-knowledge to know that when I put myself in circumstances that the decision will put myself into, am I typically a thriver, or do I feel overwhelmed? So it's self-knowledge, but it's really focused on, if I make this decision, what will the result be, and do I want that result? And then the third way we use our brains to make decision is intuition. And intuition is a feeling. Now, there's a picture on this slide of a human body, and those are all nerve endings. And what we've discovered over the last 10 years is that there are brain cells throughout our entire body. That is the same exact design of the brain cells that are up in your cranium are distributed throughout your body, and there's a large concentration in literally our gut, that is our intestine. And our brain is communicating back and forth with these brain cells throughout our body, and they're seeing patterns. They're noticing patterns, and often these patterns are out of our consciousness, and they're often reflected in our gut. So when people say trust your gut, what they mean is this is that intuitive judgment. Now, I'll just tell you a quick story. When I was about 40, I went through a really dark time in my life because my wife of 20 years, was 42, decided that this wasn't working, and so she was going to leave, and she was going to leave with someone else. So it was a very dark time in my life, and it was something I'd never expected to happen. And I questioned my judgment about anything, and I had a lot of decisions to make about my life. And I was really struggling, and I went through a period where I was just going to trust my intuition. I was totally blindsided. So in other words, I had no data that suggested that my life was headed in this direction. And by being blindsided, I just decided to become a kind of a feeling person and just go with my feelings. And what I found out is that that didn't really work out very well. And I did a lot of studying on intuition, and this is what I found. That intuition is a really good warning light. In other words, you'd almost call it negative intuition. If your gut is telling you not to do something, I really recommend you pay attention to that. But if your gut is telling you to do something, that may be caused by a lot of emotions, because I'll tell you one other thing. By the way, what this slide is about is that intuition is a really good warning light, but it's not a good navigator for life. And I'll tell you why. What we now know about people is that our brains really develop along two different polarities. And one polarity is novelty seeking. And novelty seeking people are curious, and they're brave, and they're courageous. They can also be reckless and kind of wild because they don't see a lot of threat in change or new opportunities. So their intuitive feeling is to go for it all the time. And then there are other people who actually have fewer dopamine receptors. In other words, they don't feel that great around novelty or unclear circumstances. And so their intuition is always saying, stop, don't, because they're very sensitive to threat. So we're wired this way. And my experience over several years of trying this is that intuition is very reliable on telling you what not to do, but not that good at telling you what to do. So what I determined after a period of trial is that the big decisions in my life were going to make sense analytically. In other words, all the data that I had was going to support my decision, at least most of it. That I was going to do a practical analysis, so I'd be quite, that the results that I would get are quite probably the ones that I want. And then I'd do my final gut check and see was my gut saying. If the warning lights weren't going off, I'd go for it. Now, I want to tell you this, and why I'm making a big deal of it is my life changed significantly for the better when I began to make decisions like this. And that's the gift I want to give you. Now, one of the other things that I learned is that when you're making hard decisions, our brain is really designed to make a decision between two positive choices. So let's decide you're going to go ahead. And the way you create two positive choices is you ask yourself, what's the least you can do to start moving in this direction? And then what's the most you can do to start moving in that direction? And our brains are really designed to probably choose the one in the middle. In other words, there's a third alternative that you don't initially create for yourself, which is somewhere in the middle between the least you can do and the most you can do. And the reason it's important to do more than the least you can do is to try to get a result quickly. Because if you get a positive result quickly, you'll continue to move in that direction. Now, lately, I've really been using this model for decision making as you've come to a determination you're going to make a decision. You've taken the steps to look at the least you can do and the most you can do, and you've settled on a decision. And the final test is the probability test. So the probability test is the one you use to really motivate you to do your best. And the probability test, you ask the question, what's the best thing that can happen if I take this first step and make this Goldilocks decision? And you write that down, you actually write it down, and you assign a probability to it. So do you think there's a 70% chance it'll happen, an 80% chance? What you want to do is create conditions in which you get an 80% chance of that happening. And then to motivate yourself, you go back to that first question, is it okay if nothing changes? So the way you really channel that motivation is you ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen if we don't make this decision? If I don't make this decision, what's the worst that can happen? And you write it down, and writing really makes it real to you. And if that outcome, again, is highly probable, like if I don't do something, the probability of something I don't want to continue happening, is 80% or 70%, that is going to motivate you to take action. Now, the final safety check, or the wisdom move at this point, you decide to take action, is just put together a little action plan. And what an action plan is, it's just, I'm going to do this by then. And if you break down your decision into steps, you can always check along the way and make changes along the way. It's a way of creating a navigation system as you go through this big change. So here's your assignment. I really want you to examine things in your life or your work that just simply aren't okay if they keep going. And I want you to consider the options that you have using your whole mind. So remember, that's analytical, practical, and intuitive. Then go ahead and do the process I just talked about. What would be a first step in making a decision that will take you to a destination you really want to go to? And what's the least you could do? What's the most you could do? What's the most reasonable first choice? Then go through the probability set of questions. What's the best outcome you can get from making that decision, and what's the worst? And remember, I'm asking you to do this because I want you to really be committed to the decision. And then if you put together just a little on paper, a little like step chart, it could be the first 3 steps and when you're going to do them, you'll get on your way because you've created a mental image in your brain about those steps that reduce your sense of threat. And then what would be ideal is to discuss your process with your other teammates and enlist their support and so forth. You may want to discuss it with loved ones or other people that are important to you. Now, I just want to make one thing as we close, what kind of decisions am I talking about? So it could be a decision about, let's say you want to get a new car. And so you put some time and you examine all the data you can about 2 or 3 cars that you might consider. And you might be looking at gas mileage or safety or room or reliability or all those kinds of things. Then you go and you test drive the car, and what you're looking for is practicality. Does this fit my lifestyle? Will it work? Will it functionally work? Will it do what I need to do? Haul other people and luggage and so on in the way that I need to be? Is it the right size to maneuver in traffic or something of that nature? And then finally, does this car just feel like me? Does it feel right? That's my intuition. What color would I really want? Is there anything that I could do extra on this car that would give me a little buzz so I was really happy with it? So that's just an example of a simple decision. Another decision, in closing, I'll just give you this last one, would be about a promotion. So let's suppose you really wanted a promotion. Well, the first thing you'd start off is, I think I want that job. But first, you do some analysis. What's the job description? Then you can do some practical research, which is ask people who do that job, what results do they produce? Ask yourself, do you think I could produce those results? If I produce those results, would it make me feel satisfied? Is that the kind of work that I really like doing? And then finally, going back to the intuition, does this job really feel right? Is it consistent with my identity and where I want to go in my career? You see how simple? Once you start thinking this way, it'll become habitual. And I can guarantee you, as much as anybody can guarantee you anything, which is 80%, that your life will improve by making better decisions. And that's my hope for you. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.